one of these trig questions was going to be one of your 6 pointers on the Algebra 2 exam. But I don't think it happened last year. Anyway, okay. It takes 5 seconds to complete one normal breathing cycle. So what do you get out of that first sentence? Period is 5. Which is 2 pi over b. So that actually allows us to find what b we're going to use in our structure. Remember, our structure is y equals a times the sine of b x minus c plus d. That's going to help us find b. If we cross multiply, we'll get, I'll work up. 5b equals 2 pi. Divide by 5 on both sides, and b equals 2 pi over 5. So that will be in our equation. The cycle consists of inhaling and exhaling. Velocity of airflow is positive when we inhale and negative when we exhale. It is measured in liters per second at time t equals 0. The velocity of airflow is 0. So our x-axis is going to be our time in seconds. We're not going to go backwards in time. So I'm going to put my y-axis way over here. And what is the label for the y-axis? What is changing as time goes on? That's the unit, but what's the velocity? Right. Velocity of airflow. And the unit is liters per second. So our cycle is 5 seconds long. I don't really want to count by ones, to be honest, because then when I split 5 in half, I'll be at 2.5, and I'll be halfway in between. So I'm just going to go 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at time 0, the velocity is 0. Oh, it's still even going to get into decimals. So now I'm really glad I skipped one. At 1.25 seconds, the velocity is 0.6. So if I want to, what's the highest? And then negative 0.6. So I'm going to count by 0.1s. So at 1.25, my velocity is 0.6. So that, where's my, well, if my starting and my ending are at 0 and 5, where's my halfway point going to be? Start, end of a sine curve. Where's my halfway point? Where's that? 2.5. Which tells us that when now halfway between 0 and 2.5 is where, Mackenzie? Halfway between these two. 0 and 2.5. 1.25 is where the maximum is going to occur, and that's the point they just gave us. They just gave us what is happening at 1.25 seconds. And then 1.25 seconds after the 2.5 will be the 3.75 that they're about to give us. And the velocity is negative 0.6. And then we complete the curve within that 5-second period that we decided. So as I'm going through to write the equation, y equals, what's my a value? Morgan? 0.6. My b value we already found out was 2 pi over 5. What's my C value, Trista? So 0, right? There's no phase shift. And what's my D value, Andrew? 0. Midline still where. So once you kind of clean this up, it'll just look like that. Algebra 2 functions, I don't think they should, but they do. Algebra 2 questions like this give you the structure. Don't expect that. Expect that you need to memorize this and know what the structure is that you're plugging into. Okay? Don't expect to be told that. Any questions on that? Okay? I want you to take the next, actually before I jump in there, I'm immediately looking at this and I hate it. I think I told you on the first day, some textbooks do it that way. That's not the way we're going to do it. We're going to do what we do with the B out in front, so the C is actually the phase shift. The way that this is written, C is not the phase shift. You wouldn't know the phase shift until you divide it out of B, and then C over B would be the phase shift. So write it like this so that all 4 variables have their purpose. Then if you want to distribute the B through for your final answer, you may do that. So I want you to take 5 minutes or so on your own, and I'll randomly collect a few of these, and we'll go through and review kind of what we think of everybody's. Before I collect anybody's, raise your hand if you have a question. Andrew. No. It says use a sine function. If it just said write a sinusoidal, like sinusoidal means like either or, you could do that. So I'm guessing, I haven't done a thing yet, so I'm guessing it looks more conducive to a cosine. Any other questions? If you were tempted to use a cosine, but you were forced to use a sine, my guess is that there's going to be some sort of phase shift, right? Any questions? Andrew picked 3 numbers between 1 and 15. I decided this one. I'm nervous. All right. Let me see. So I think I'm going to work with what I think I have the least to work with and then work our way up. So this is the first one. And our region is 30 degrees north of the equator, averages a minimum of 10 hours of daylight in December. So immediately what I find interesting about this is that the number of hours in daylight is negative 10. Can someone explain to me how we would ever have negative 10 hours of daylight? That's not possible, right? 10 being the minimum means that that's your minimum and 14 hours is your maximum. So we're just oscillating between 10 and 14, not negative 10 and 14. You follow? Okay? Because in the other one, it was different because it said, what was the velocity one on the front? It specifically said that the velocity was negative 0.6. And that does make sense for velocity. If you take physics, you know that if a velocity is negative, that means it's going backwards at that speed, right? how fast are you going is a positive mile per hour, meters per second answer. But what is the velocity? If your car is reversing, your velocity is -5. Because velocity gives you magnitude and direction. John, you don't like that. Anyway, velocity can be negative. The number of hours in a day cannot be negative. So I immediately have an issue with that because then their midline is off and so on and so forth, and no wonder they were confused. Let's go to the next one. This person does have minimum of 10, which is happening in December. Hours of daylight are maximum in June, so this is their time in months. Months since what, though? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If December is 1, then June wouldn't be until 7, right? That makes sense? They put 1 and they did their December time. So January, February, March, April, May, June. So they're a little off in their scaling. January should have been 1, which means 0 is where that minimum of 10 is. Which means the halfway point between 0, their halfway point between 0 and 6 is the 3rd month, which is March, and then we were back on track on the other side of this. Good. So we have, yes, what would ideally be a negative cosine, right? Well, that's a really rough curve I did the first time. Okay. So I get it now, why we would want that to be a cosine, but it does say sine. So we had a phase shift. Where does our sine cycle start? At what x-coordinate? Aiden? 3. Because your sine curves start on the midline, go up, down, and then it would come back up and end at month 15. So we have a phase shift 3 units to the right, not 1 unit to the right, 3. So that would be x minus 3. Our period was 12 months, perfect. So 12 equals 2 pi over b. We cross multiply, we get that b equals pi over 6. Great. Our amplitude is not 12. Here's our midline. Our midline is 12. I see the confusion. The midline is 12. Midline goes at the end. So this person, switch these two. The midline is 12. The amplitude is how high is it going off the midline? From 12 hours to 14 hours, it's going 2, and it's a positive 2 because we start first with our curve by going up. A negative sine curve goes down first and comes around. That's a negative sign. This is a positive sign. If we wanted to write a negative sign, we could. We would just have to think of our cycle starting here. So it would have been shifted 9 units to the right. And there we go. That is the answer. Just for the sake of cancel that thought. I want to look at this last person's thoughts on this. Andrew? Is this you? No. By going off the graph, what do you mean? Which part? Off the graph to the left or to the right? Oh, no, that's fine. As long as you identify that your sine cycle is starting, well, the one that we identified, your sine cycle can start a gazillion places, but here it goes up, down, and you don't really need to see the whole thing out, because you already know what the period is just from the start and end of what you see as the cosine. So you don't really need to see the whole thing. You just need to make sure you see where your sine curve is actually starting. So what do we think about their answer? Because that's not the same as the previous person's that we did, which was here. Yeah. Right, so they did a +3. Now, maybe that's what they meant. Because if you go like this and continue this, this is the start of a sine curve 3 units to the left. So if we argue that that was correct, what would have to be changed? If we argue that this is correct, this does start a sine curve. See, it's starting on the midline, it's going down, then up and back down. Go ahead. It would have to be a negative sine curve. So sometimes when I read these, it's hard for me to know what that person was thinking. Did they intentionally do it as a shift to the left and screw up the negative sign part of it? Or did they really mean to shift it 3 units to the right? I mean, I would guess they probably really meant to shift, but I don't really know. It's hard for you guys to document your thoughts on this type. So there are 2 versions that are different, but are the correct graph. Okie doke. And then just for the sake of talking about it, if we did do a cosine, and we did treat this as the start of our graph, oops, I really should look down when I trace, not up. This would be a negative cosine, right? Minimum to minimum. Amplitude still is 2. B value is not changed because the period is not changed, but we are now no longer shifted, and the midline stays the same. So some key things to realize: if you're able to write a sine or a cosine, or even better, I ask you write a sine curve for it and write a cosine curve for it. Maybe I ask you to do both, and then we just kind of prove that either one is fine. Your B will not change, and your midline will not change. The numerical value of your amplitude will not change. The only things that will change are your shift and whether or not it's a plus or minus sine or cosine. Okay? Other than that, they should be pretty much the same. Good. Okay. I'm going to give you back your quizzes. And what I would like you to do on the back of your quizzes right now is work on correcting whatever you got wrong. Or you can use substitute paper if you don't want to keep moving back and forth. No. Yes, the ones I could see over are